My father passed away on a crisp October morning, when golden leaves carpeted the path to our old house. The sky that day was strangely clear, almost too bright for the heaviness in the air, like a silent storm cloud hovering above each of us. Friends, neighbors, and relatives came one by one, holding white flowers, eyes lowered. Yet, between the soft words of condolence, I caught snippets of whispers, quiet as a pin dropping into a glass, but sharp enough to pierce through the moment. I'm the youngest daughter, the one everyone says looks most like my father, from the shape of my eyes to the way I go silent when things get tense. But that day, I couldn't keep the silence inside me. My eldest sister's glance slid over me, cold as ice. My older brother avoided everyone's eyes, glued to the phone in his hands. My mother sat in the front row, her back straight, her face unreadable, calm, almost serene. But I knew she was hiding something. When the priest spoke the final prayer, it hit me, we weren't just here to say goodbye to my father. We were also standing at the threshold of something else, something everyone knew could stir up a storm, the will. My father was a private man. He never bragged about his wealth, but everyone knew he had worked tirelessly his whole life to provide for us. Yet in those final months, he changed, he traveled more, spoke less, and dodged questions about the future. Rumor had it he'd rewritten his will. And not everyone in the family would be mentioned. The murmurs grew louder after the ceremony. What if he left everything to someone outside the family? Someone whispered behind me. My heart raced, not out of fear of losing money, but because I felt I was about to uncover a piece of my father's life I had never known. What I didn't realize was that after that day, my family would never be whole again. After the funeral, we returned to our family's old wooden house, the place my father had lived for more than 40 years. The smell of aged timber, the faint scent of coffee still lingering in the kitchen, even the wool sweater he always wore in winter. All of it was still there. But the warmth that made it home was gone. My father's lawyer, Mr. Harris, was already waiting in the living room. He was in his 60s, tall and lean, with round glasses and a calm face, though his eyes were sharp as a blade. In front of him sat a large yellow envelope, carefully sealed. "Before we begin," he said, his voice low and steady, "I want you all to remember, these are Charles Miller's final wishes. Please respect them." I glanced at my mother. She didn't respond, just tightened her grip on the teacup in her hands. My oldest sister, Margaret, sat with her arms crossed. My brother, David, bounced his leg, like he was counting down the seconds. Mr. Harris opened the envelope, pulled out a stack of papers, and began to read. The first part was my father's message to us, words about the love he had for our family, and his hope that we'd always stay close. But the more I listened, the more I noticed. There was something strange between the lines, a pause that wasn't just in his voice, it was in his choices. Then came the division of assets. The house we were sitting in, left to Margaret. The savings account and most of the stocks, to David. A smaller sum, along with a few personal keepsakes, to me. And then, the moment that froze the entire room. My father had left 1/3 of his estate to someone named Elena Brooks. None of us had ever heard that name before. No family. No friend. A complete stranger. "Excuse me. Who is Elena Brooks?" I blurted out. Mr. Harris looked at me, then flicked his eyes toward my mother, as if deciding whether to speak. "She's someone your father trusted deeply in the last years of his life." Margaret gave a cold, sarcastic smile. "Trusted enough to forget his own family?" David let out a short laugh and shook his head. "Sounds like a mistress to me." My mother set her teacup down with a sharp clink. "That's enough. We're not discussing this here." But her voice trembled, and her hand curled in on itself, like she was holding something invisible. I stayed quiet, but my mind was spinning. Who was Elena Brooks? Why had my father left her such a large share? And why did my mother react that way? Mr. Harris read on until the end, then closed the papers. If anyone has questions, we can arrange a private meeting. Margaret shot to her feet. I want to meet her. Right now. David chimed in, me too. I don't buy any of this. My mother said nothing. She simply rose and walked out of the room, her shoulders slightly hunched. I stayed where I was, my fingers wrapped tightly around the silver bracelet my father had given me when I turned 16. And in that moment, I realized, this will didn't just divide the assets. It was tearing my family apart. That afternoon, I slipped upstairs into my father's room. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, the neat desk, the bookshelves crammed full, the pocket watch he used to hold while thinking. On the desk sat a worn brown leather notebook. I opened it. The first pages were full of financial notes. But halfway through, I found a hastily scribbled message. Elena, thank you for being there when I had no one else. Thank you for keeping your promise. I froze. When I had no one else? He still had us. Didn't he? Tucked inside the notebook was a small photograph, my father standing beside a woman with soft brown hair and kind eyes, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. They didn't look like lovers, but there was something in their gaze. Something that said more than words ever could. I heard a knock on the door. My mother stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the notebook in my hands. There was a long pause before she finally said, quietly, there are things you're better off not knowing. But I already knew. And I needed to know more. That night, Margaret called me and David, her voice sharp with urgency. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. I'm going to see her, Elena Brooks. I found her address. I hesitated. Margaret. This might not be as simple as you think. Not simple? Our father's been gone less than a week and some stranger inherits a fortune. What else is there to think about? She snapped. David cut in. I'm coming. If I have to, I'll ask her straight out what she did to earn Dad's trust. I sighed. I didn't want this to turn into a war. But I couldn't stand the feeling of being left in the dark. In the end, I agreed to go. The next morning, we stood outside a small house in the suburbs. It didn't look like the home of someone who'd just inherited a third of a large estate. A few pots of chrysanthemums sat on the porch, and the paint on the siding was peeling. Margaret rang the bell. A woman in her early 40s answered, long brown hair, kind face, but eyes that looked tired. Are you Elena Brooks? Margaret asked, her tone like a blade. Elena nodded. Yes. And you are? We're the children of Charles Miller. Something shifted in her expression, not fear, but sadness. She invited us in, poured tea, and sat across from us. Margaret didn't waste time. We want to know why our father left you so much money. Elena was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, there are things I think he wanted to keep hidden. But maybe it's time. She stood, disappeared into another room, and returned with an old wooden box. Inside were letters, most in my father's handwriting. She handed one to me. Elena. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have survived that year. Thank you for taking care of and protecting Sarah when I couldn't. I read it twice. Sarah? Who was Sarah? Elena's gaze met mine, steady and serious. Sarah is my daughter. And your half-sister. The air in the room froze. Margaret's eyes widened. David shot up from his chair. What? Our father had another child? David's voice was almost a shout. Elena nodded, her hands trembling. I met him after my divorce. We had a brief relationship. When I found out I was pregnant, he wanted to acknowledge the baby. But your mother, his wife, was going through a difficult time. He was afraid of breaking your family apart, so he kept it a secret. He supported us financially, but never publicly. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and something softer. Margaret's face flushed red. You're lying. My father would never. Elena opened the box again and pulled out a photo, my father holding a little girl with curly brown hair and the exact same eyes as his. I couldn't deny what I saw. In his final years, when he was sick, I was there at the hospital when you couldn't be. Sarah visited too. He wanted to make up for lost time, Elena said, her voice breaking. David was silent now. I knew he was thinking about all those business trips when Dad vanished for days. Margaret still wouldn't back down. If he wanted to help you and your daughter, he could have done it while he was alive. Why leave you so much in his will? Elena looked straight at her. Because he knew that after he was gone, you wouldn't accept Sarah. He wanted her to have a fair start. That money. It's not for me to live comfortably. It's for her education, so she doesn't grow up in the shadows, like he did. I felt my throat tighten. In my memories, Dad was a man of few words, never good at showing emotion. But now the pieces were falling into place, the mysterious checks, the sudden trips, the distant look in his eyes when he watched children play in the park. We left Elena's house in silence. On the way home, Margaret seethed, David was deep in thought, and I couldn't stop thinking. That night, I went back into my father's room. In the desk drawer, I found a small envelope with my name on it. Inside was a short letter. My daughter. If you're reading this, I'm no longer here. I know this will hurt you, but the truth needs to be told. Life is full of difficult choices. I hope you understand that love doesn't always come with perfection. Take care of your mother, and if you can, give Sarah a chance. Tears blurred the words. The next day, I went to see Elena alone. Sarah opened the door, a girl of about 17, shy but bright-eyed. And in that moment, it felt like I was looking at a younger version of myself. I don't know where things will go from here. My family has already broken in a way that can't be mended. But maybe there's still time to build a bridge. The day I met Sarah, I thought every secret had finally been laid bare. But one line from my father's letter kept haunting me, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have survived that year. What year? And what could have happened that made him write those words? I started digging. In the garage, among dusty storage boxes, I found a set of old hospital records, dated 2004. Some pages were torn at the corners, but enough remained for me to see that my father had been admitted in critical condition after a serious car accident. And the person listed as responsible for paying his medical bills wasn't my mother. It was Elena Brooks. I took it to my mother. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly at the sound of that name. It took her a long time to speak. Your father disappeared for almost 3 months that year. People said he was away on business, but I knew better. I didn't ask, because I thought he'd come back. When he finally did, he'd lost 20 pounds and he never told me what happened. I asked, did you know about Elena? She didn't answer right away, but her eyes gave me the truth before her mouth did. I knew. But not everything. I only knew she saved his life once. And your father. He carried that debt in his heart. When I told David and Margaret what I'd found, the whole thing exploded. Margaret instantly claimed Elena had exploited that life-saving debt to drain him of money. David thought the opposite, that maybe Dad had been hiding something even darker, and Elena was the only one who knew the full truth. The argument lasted for hours. Our voices echoed through the house. Margaret's voice was sharp, almost shaking. We need to contest the will. There's no way he left her that much just out of gratitude. David shot back, if we do that, we'll destroy everything. Sarah will get dragged into the mess. Is that the kind of people we want to be? I stood in the middle, feeling like I was being torn in two. They both looked at me, waiting for me to choose a side. Margaret pressed, you're the youngest. Dad loved you most. Are you with us, or with them? David just shook his head, but his eyes pleaded, don't make this worse. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the question burning in my mind. If I sided with Margaret, I'd be shattering the fragile bridge I'd just begun to build with Sarah. But if I sided with David, I'd be turning against my sister, the one who had protected me my whole childhood. And in that moment, I realized. Maybe the only real choice was not to choose at all. Maybe I had to break every side apart, even if it meant every one of them would hate me for it. I decided not to tell Margaret or David about my plan. Instead, I started tracing Elena's steps, and digging into 2004, the year my father vanished. Through a friend who works at City Hall, I got access to old police records. On November 14th of that year, there'd been a serious car accident in rural Pennsylvania. The car was totaled. And the passenger had died on the spot. Her name was Anna Brooks. My heart sank. Brooks, the same last name as Elena. I went back to Elena's house, but this time, it wasn't to confront her. Sarah answered the door, her eyes watchful but not hostile. I asked, Sarah, who was Anna Brooks to you? She looked at me for a long time before whispering, my mother. The words hit me like a punch. Sarah told me that on that night, during a snowstorm, her mother had been driving my father. The crash happened without warning. Her mother died instantly. My father was severely injured. Elena, Anna's sister, Sarah's aunt, quit her job, sold her house, and used everything she had to pay his hospital bills and care for him until he recovered. He owed my aunt his life, Sarah said quietly. But he also owed my family an apology. One he never gave. I went home, my head spinning. Now I understood why my father had left a share of his estate to Elena. But I also knew Margaret would never accept it. At our final family meeting before filing the inheritance papers, the air was stretched thin, ready to snap. Margaret raised her voice. David tried to keep the peace, but every word only poured gasoline on the fire. I stood, pulled out a copy of the accident report, and laid it in the center of the table. This, I said. This is why. Dad made his choice based on this truth. You can hate it, you can blame him. But this is the debt he believed he had to repay. Margaret glared at me. And what about us? What about Mom? I took a deep breath. We had him for all the years after. Elena only has the memory of someone she lost. No one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. I knew our family would never be the same again. But at least I'd made my choice, not to stand with either side, but to stand with the truth. Was it the right choice? I don't know. But maybe, sometimes, justice in a family isn't about who wins or loses. It's about who's willing to face the past. Margaret stared at the stack of files, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. David said nothing, leaning back in his chair as if he'd just heard a verdict that had already been decided. My mother sat at the head of the table, her eyes lifting from the page to meet mine, a look not quite angry, but heavy with a weariness I had never seen in her before. The ticking of the wall clock was so loud I could count each passing second. The faint scent of cold coffee lingered in the room, mingling with the suffocating tension that rose like smoke. No one touched the papers. No one asked another question. I noticed Margaret's hand tremble slightly, but she quickly pulled it back, folding her arms across her chest as if building an invisible wall. David avoided my gaze, his eyes drifting toward the window, where autumn leaves fell slowly to the ground. The air was thick. I felt as though if anyone dared to take one deep breath, the whole room might shatter. Finally, David was the one to break the silence. Maybe. Dad did what he thought was right, he said softly, his voice trembling just a little. But that doesn't mean we have to just swallow it. Margaret let out a laugh, but it wasn't one of amusement. Right? And what about Mom? What about us? Dad repaid Elena with our family's money. What about the debt he owed to his own family? Mom sighed, the sound like it was pulling a piece of her soul out with it. You don't understand. Your father wouldn't have survived without them. Sometimes, a debt like that, it can't be measured in money. I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw something I had never noticed before, a quiet acceptance, as if she had been bracing herself for this moment all along. Margaret turned to me, her gaze sharp as a blade. And you? You're just going to stand there and be Dad's spokesperson? I drew in a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. No. I'm just telling the truth. We have the right to be angry, to be hurt. But we also have to face what really happened. David pressed a hand to his forehead, as if trying to hold back a pounding headache. The worst part, he said, is that we'll never get the chance to hear Dad explain it himself. His words hung in the air like an unfinished melody. And I realized. Some questions will never have an answer. The family meeting ended without a handshake, without a word of reconciliation. Only the heavy footsteps of people leaving the room, each carrying away a fragment of what once was a home. I stayed behind, tidying the mess of papers scattered across the table. As I picked up the copy of the accident report, a small sheet of paper slipped out from the folder. It was old, the handwriting shaky, my father's. If you're reading this one day, know that I have loved my family more than anything. But there are debts that, if left unpaid, will never let a person live in peace. I stood still. Those words seemed to erase the line between our side and their side. Yet at the same time, they placed a new weight on my shoulders, how to protect what's left of this family when the truth has already split us apart. Outside, the November wind blew hard, swirling golden leaves into the air before letting them fall, just like how the storm of the past had stirred up every buried memory. I knew it would take years to heal. Maybe it would never heal at all. But at least I had chosen to stand on the side of truth. And for a brief moment, I believed. Somewhere out there, Dad was smiling. If it were you, in this situation, would you choose to stand with your family, or with the truth? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to At True Moments Life so you won't miss the next story.